Hi, Year 12, and welcome to the lecture on gender and achievement. In this lecture, we're going to be focusing on why girls seem to be doing better in schools. When it comes to explaining why there is differential achievement for different social groups, many sociologists will structure their argument around the impact of home background, particularly the debate between material factors and cultural factors, so for example, parent attitudes. Can you please try and remind yourself by annotating on your PowerPoint any examples of material factors that you know have affected how well a student does or doesn't do at school, and likewise any cultural factors. You've got one example there, parent attitudes, but are there any other cultural factors that explain why certain students might do better than others before moving on? Now, when it comes to gender, it's important to remember that material factors don't tend to differ very much for boys and girls. For example, if parents have a son and a daughter, they don't choose to spend more on one than the other. However, the material costs of the toys that they might play with might have an impact. So, for example, many of the toys that boys want to play with now, like computers, are a bit more expensive than some of the toys that girls might want to play with in terms of dolls. But really, material factors don't have much of an impact on the difference in achievement of boys and girls. What is much more important when considering gender and differential achievement are cultural factors. So how do you think parents' attitudes might differ in terms of what they expect from their sons to achieve and what they expect from their daughters to achieve? And what other attitudes do you think about the different behaviours associated with being a girl and associated with being a boy? And what impact do you think these different attitudes might have on how these young people behave at school? Within schools, there are factors that can affect the difference of achievement between boys and girls are things like teachers' attitudes, in particular how they label particular students. Now, do teachers treat the genders differently from your experience? And what type of treatment do you expect of teachers towards boys? And how do they tend to treat girls? And have a think, does this seem to benefit boys or girls? So, for example, if a teacher always expects a boy to be badly behaved, are they more likely to throw them out of the classroom? Okay? Or are they more likely to throw a girl who rarely misbehaves out of the classroom? Up to you. Considering labelling, don't forget the self-fulfilling prophecy. If a teacher does label a student negatively, you should know now that this can trigger a self-fulfilling prophecy. What is this? And please give examples. As well as looking at teachers' attitudes and labelling, we also need to examine what actually goes on within the taught curriculum, where we apparently have typically gendered subjects, ones that are seen as typically male or for boys, and those that are seen as typically female. This is most noticeable when students need to select subject choices. So educational sociologists are very interested in students' option choices at GCSE, A-level, and university. Please have a look online and see if you can find out any of the differences in subject choices at each of these levels, GCSE, A-level, and university. And let me know next lesson at what level is the gender divide most clear. As well as the taught curriculum, we also need to consider what goes on with the hidden curriculum. How does the hidden curriculum help to either reinforce gender roles, or is the hidden curriculum actually better at breaking down gender role stereotypes? See if you can consider any examples where the hidden curriculum either encourages boys to be masculine and encourages girls to be feminine, or opportunities where the students are given to break from their typical gender roles. Another key area within the school environment is the formation of subcultures. Apologies for this funny formatting on this page. Subcultures play a huge part in how well a student does at school. Okay? The time they spend with their peers will influence how well they value educational success or not. Typically, boys tend to end up in anti-school subcultures more than girls. and we're going to be examining some of the reasons for this. However, there are more and more cases of what we'd call a ladette type girl who are ending up in these anti-school subcultures, and we're finding it very challenging to break many of these young ladies out of this culture that devalues educational success and actually seems to favour them behaving in masculine and sometimes hypersexualized ways in order to gain status among their peers. Finally, when considering why boys aren't doing as well as girls at school, it's worth looking at what's going on in wider society, particularly the type of school that student might end up going to. When we look at single-sex schools, statistics seem to suggest that single-sex schools seem to benefit girls more than boys. Girls tend to get higher grades if they are in all-girls schools. However, when the same is examined for boys, it's found that boys in all-male schools tend to do less well than if they're in mixed-ability schools. This seems to suggest that boys benefit from mixed education more than girls, and as a result, they should be educated in a mixed-gender environment. Boys also tend to do better when they are privately educated. As a result, when you look at the population of private schools, such as Eton, they tend to have a slightly higher proportion than boys go to those schools than girls. Finally, when considering wider societal factors, it's definitely relevant to understand what's going on with job opportunities at the moment. Girls are doing much better in education. However, when it comes to jobs, they still tend to be getting paid less than men. However, many sociologists are quick to point out that the economy is rapidly shifting away from typically masculine jobs and in favour of the service economy, which is an industry where women typically do better because they have the people skills required to work in the service sector. As boys go through school, sometimes it's quite challenging to get them to raise their aspirations because they don't seem to think there are careers out there for them, particularly within the manual industry. And that can link to things like the formation of anti-school subcultures and poor exam results and poor attendance. Girls likewise struggle with girls likewise sometimes struggle with the job opportunities that are open to them. Yes, they can be encouraged to go into typically female occupations such as nursing, teaching, and jobs that seem to involve an element of care. However, the opportunities for them to progress maybe within engineering or science or architecture aren't necessarily there. As a result, girls tend to not take subjects like graphic design, like science or construction at school, because they don't necessarily see that job opportunity as available to them. So, as discussed earlier, we're now going to focus on why is it that girls might be doing slightly better in education. If you have a look at these statistics, again, I'm really sorry that the formatting has changed. What patterns can you see clearly emerging between girls and boys? Girls seem to be achieving a much higher proportion of A stars to C's than boys, and the pattern continues with today's results. We're going to be examining in school a range of sources of data looking at boys' and girls' achievement, and we're going to be trying to spot some of the new patterns that seem to be emerging in the more recent results. Finally, I'd like you to have a look at the extracts from this news article from a Mr. Pearson, who is head of British Telecom. Okay, there is a debate at the moment within business that the future is female. Now, this touches on what I mentioned just a few minutes ago about what's happening within our economy. What I'd like you to do is to read through some of the extracts from the article, and I want you to annotate what impact you think this is going to have on what happens in school. Mr. Pearson has made a few insightful observations, particularly with automation. Automation has been going on for ages, okay? The idea that machinery has been replacing people. Now, at the moment, we're seeing a lots of machinery replacing people maybe in supermarkets with those automated checkouts. Now, they're probably replacing more women, to be honest, because women tend to work in the supermarket environment. However, Mr. Pearson argues that more intellectual jobs are going to be increasingly done by software, particularly those ones around information technology, software design. And as a result, this is an area where boys may feel they now lack job opportunities, okay? So as he says there, traditional male jobs have been vanishing by the millions over the decades. So what impact is this going to have on boys in education? Okay. He also makes a really good point about the fact that, yes, machines can replace people who work in IT, they can replace people who work in supermarkets, and they can probably replace some people who work in schools maybe one day. However, he does argue that machines are not a realistic substitute for childcare, elderly care, nursing, or other personal services. Now, as I mentioned before, we are moving towards a service economy, okay, where people's skills will be way more important than things like being good with numbers. And you can't rely on a machine to give care to people in need, particularly people who are quite vulnerable. So as a result, women are at an advantage because they have those skills in place beforehand. What's really interesting about this article is he found out that 61% of employers now seek communication skills. Now, this also links with what we've been discussing with class and achievement. If employers are seeking good communication skills, what social class is going to be at a disadvantage and why? Please mention the key term and the sociologist that makes this argument. And 58% want team working, while only 28% want problem solving on their wish list. So people who can go in and troubleshoot, people who can go in and hire, people who can go in and fire people that aren't doing their jobs right. Only 28% of employers want that. And finally, understanding money is only 4% on their wish list, and it was their last. So as a result, Mr. Pearson would agree with the argument that yes, the future is certainly female, and men are going to have to be very flexible in the jobs they do in the future. Now, I'd like you to have a think about what impact this is going to have on in schools. What's going to be going on in the classroom? What subjects are they going to have to drop? And what subjects are they going to have to start teaching in order to make sure that boys, as well as girls, have the right skills for this new economy that values people skills and face-to-face care above possibly jobs that might have involved more manual labour or the intellectual jobs around software design and ICT.